Have you ever worked at a movie theater? It's a job where you tier tickets, inhale the scent of popcorn, and gaze at the giant, glowing screen in the dark. It might seem mundane, even boring, but not all movie theaters are the same. The cinema where I worked had 11 rules. These weren't in any employee manual. They were passed down by word of mouth, and those who broke them, well, you can see what became of me. My name is Sean McBride, 21 years old. I worked as an usher at this cinema for 3 years, a high school dropout with a minor criminal record. I wasn't the kind of person who'd normally get hired. Still, there were 2 reasons I took the job. First, I had no other options. Second, the pay was as good as a manager's. Why such high pay? I understood quickly after I started. Every day, a horror awaited me that was worth every penny. 3 years ago, on a rainy night, from my very first day, this cinema was anything but ordinary. As I approached the building, a heavy dread settled deep in my chest. The exterior was beautiful. An Art Deco entrance, colorful stained glass windows, and a classic marquee towering overhead. But something felt unnatural about it. There was an odd number of windows, and only the second floor windows were painted black. When I pushed open the heavy front doors, a sweet, cloying smell assaulted my nostrils. The scent of old carpet mixed faintly with a metallic tang. I later learned this smell never fades. No matter how much you cleaned, how many air fresheners you used, it was a scent the building itself emanated. David Clark, the manager who interviewed me, seemed like a gentle middle-aged man. But the employee rulebook he handed me went beyond common sense. David, in a quiet but unyielding voice, ordered me to memorize the rulebook. Questions could wait. First, I had to learn everything. The moment I opened the rulebook, I was speechless. The cover read, Pandora Cinema Employee Survival Guide, not an employee handbook, but a survival guide. At the time, I thought it was a sick joke. The first page contained a warning written in red ink. This rulebook was created to protect your life. Disregard it, and you will die. Ignore it, and you will vanish. Break it, and your very existence will become a part of the cinema. Do not leave the building until you have finished reading. Following that were the 11 rules described in detail. Each rule was accompanied by failure examples of past employees, like case studies, their names, ages, times of death, and the conditions in which their bodies were found. It was written in a cold, matter-of-fact tone, like an accident report. My first encounter with this rule happened a week after I started. That night, I was assigned to the night shift for the first time. David told me he'd be in his third-floor office unless it was an emergency, leaving me alone in the lobby. That's when I learned the true terror of this cinema. While cleaning the main lobby, I heard a pounding sound coming from room 3. Thump, 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 like someone was desperately banging on the door from the inside. Room 3 was peculiar among the cinema's auditoriums. Unlike the others, this door was unusually heavy and covered in countless scratches. Deep grooves were carved into its surface, as if claws had raked it from the inside. As I approached, a thin wisp of smoke seeped from beneath the door.
Help me!
A woman's voice cried out. It was frantic, trembling with terror.
It's a fire! The door won't open. Please, help me!
The smoke grew thicker, burning my throat. I heard the doorknob rattle. Someone was desperately trying to escape, but something was wrong. The smoke didn't smell like fire. It was a sweet scent, like burnt sugar, and mixed with the woman's voice, I faintly heard children laughing.
Sean, please.
The voice continued.
My children are with me. Hurry.
I froze. How did she know my name? To hell with the rules. People were dying. This was no time to follow regulations. The moment my hand touched the doorknob,
Stop.
an arm grabbed me from behind. I turned to see David standing there, his face contorted in anger, a stark contrast to his demeanor during the interview. David sneered.
It's clever today. Good at targeting new employees.
I couldn't believe it. The woman's screams continued from inside. Coughing, cries for help. David placed a hand on my shoulder. He seemed to sense what I had realized.
Room 3 knows everything, and it can imitate anything. But for 13 years, no one has opened that door. As long as I'm manager, I won't let the same mistake happen twice.
David's expression darkened. His predecessor had faced the same situation as me. He broke the rule and opened the door. In that instant, all the audience members inside vanished. 137 patrons, gone without a trace. All that remained were their clothes and shoes. On the seats, damp, human-shaped stains lingered. The predecessor also vanished. But sometimes he returns. From inside room 3, as a voice calling for help, waiting for new victims. 20 minutes later, the movie ended. A large number of audience members emerged from room 3. All were unharmed. When I checked inside the room, there was no sign of a fire, but on one of the seats, a damp, human-shaped stain remained. It was the premiere of Avengers: Infinity War. David had hired several cosplayers to take photos with guests in the lobby, but he was unusually nervous during the preparations.
Always verify their identity.
He repeated,
Driver's license, social security number, address. Cross-reference everything. If even one person can't be verified, call the police immediately.
The character interviews were unusually strict. David conducted interviews lasting over 2 hours for each applicant. Family background, past employment history, why they wanted the job. It was like a government agency's hiring interview. Ultimately, Captain America, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and Thor were chosen. We were made to memorize the list of hired characters. When I came out of room 6, I saw it. A man dressed as Iron Man was slowly walking through the lobby, but his suit was in terrible condition. Dirty, scratched, parts of it peeling off. His gait was unnatural, a jerky movement, as if his joints weren't functioning properly, and a strange sound emanated from inside the suit. Not a mechanical sound, but the squelch of wet flesh rubbing together. As I got closer, a foul odor assaulted my nose, the stench of rotting flesh, like a dried-up animal on a hot summer road. The worst part was the liquid seeping from the suit seams. It was dark brown, viscous, like drying blood. Behind him, 3 children followed. They looked under 13, their eyes vacant, trailing Iron Man as if on strings, their expressions lifeless. One little girl looked at me. In that instant, my blood ran cold. Her eyes were completely black, with no whites visible, and a faint smile played on her lips. I ran into the manager's office. I heard David jump up from his chair.
I knew it. I shouldn't have hired him.
He muttered, roughly pulling open a desk drawer. I caught a glimpse of its contents. Small vials of clear liquid, a sharp bronze knife, writings on old parchment, seemingly Latin, and several small dolls. Creepy dolls with hair tied to them. David grabbed a vial and the knife.
That fake is trying to drag real children into its world. Once they're taken, they never come back.
He pressed a slip of paper into my hand.
If I don't come out in 30 minutes, hit the fire alarm for a full evacuation. Then call this number.
David ran past me. From behind the door, I heard an inhuman sound, a metallic scream, and the sound of tearing flesh. Then, the splatter of liquid against the walls. The fight lasted 15 minutes. With the sound of the door closing, the children began looking around as if waking from a trance. And then they cried. They remembered nothing. 23 minutes later, David emerged from the garbage room. Red stains were on his shirt. A foul odor wafted from his clothes. The garbage room was a disaster. The floor, walls, and even the ceiling were splattered with that dark liquid. In a corner, several black plastic bags lay. From beneath them, that liquid slowly oozed. The most unsettling thing was the handprints left on the wall. Not human handprints, but prints with abnormally long fingers and sharply pointed claws, as if something had desperately clawed at the wall, trying to escape. While cleaning, I discovered something strange. A piece of Iron Man's mask remained, but it wasn't made of metal. It was organic material. When I touched it, it felt like dried skin. The moment I picked up the fragment, I saw a hallucination. In a dark room, dozens of children sat. All had vacant eyes, staring in the same direction, and a figure stood before them. Something dressed as Iron Man was reaching out to the children. David told me about past incidents. He gave a bitter laugh and pulled out a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings from a filing cabinet.
Read these, and your questions will be answered.
These documents had been collected by successive managers, records of incidents that occurred at the cinema. The police dismissed them as coincidences, but
We know the truth.
David explained. An article from 15 years ago. The headline read, "Family Slaughtered. Sole Survivor Recounts Night of Terror." Of the 4 Prescott family members, only the 13-year-old son survived. The survivor's testimony was particularly striking. The man had an umbrella, an old black umbrella. He swung it around, one by one, killing my family. The testimony cut off there. The boy was in shock and couldn't provide further details. An umbrella was left at the scene. This umbrella had been deposited as lost property when the family visited the cinema, and a man with a tattoo on his left cheek claimed it as his own and took it. The cinema's lost and found ledger had detailed records. The manager at the time had failed to verify the man's identity. 7 days later, the family massacre occurred. Articles from 12 and 5 years ago were similar. Lost property from the cinema found at the scene of mass murders. David had consulted various experts to research the meaning of the tattoo: anthropologists, religious scholars, occult researchers, but no clear answer was obtained. The only clue was found in a 19th century demonology text: the mark on the left cheek, a sign of contract, a mark of one who gained perpetual life in exchange for blood and soul. In other words, that man wasn't human. He was a monster who had become immortal through a contract with something. The last article was from London in 1899, a grainy photocopy from an old newspaper. The 1899 incident followed the exact same pattern as the current ones. A man taking lost property from a theater, a strange mark on his left cheek, followed by mass murder. The same thing had been happening for over 100 years. David explained.
It's because the owner's thoughts are imbued in it. Lost property carries the owner's memories and emotions. That monster feeds on them to gain power. And by killing the owner, it makes the item completely its own.
This rule instilled the deepest fear in me. 2 months into the job, I found myself thinking about this rule often during night shifts. Other rules had concrete objects: Room 3, false characters, the tattooed man. But Rule 4 was abstract. I never knew when it would activate. When I asked David, he didn't explain in detail. He just repeated, "It's better not to know. Knowledge can sometimes make things worse." However, I had noticed something. David avoided assigning me to clean room 1. That day, David had gone home early due to illness. I was working the night shift alone. Cleaning room 1 was usually his responsibility, but instead, it became mine. From the moment I entered room 1, I felt an abnormal atmosphere. Unlike other auditoriums, the air here was heavy and suffocating. The seating arrangement was also strange. In the very front row, there was one chair facing a different direction from the others. 30 minutes into cleaning, it happened. Without warning, the lights went out. The moment I was enveloped in complete darkness, my heart froze. "Sit down. Sit down," I told myself, fumbling for the nearest seat. The moment I sat, the screen lit up. Rough picture quality, like an old film. A dark basement, a single chair, a young man tied to it. Blood streamed from his forehead, his arms red and swollen from rope burns. His clothes looked familiar. A cinema uniform. Behind me, I heard the creak of a chair. Something had sat down. Something huge, not human.
"Don't you think it's quite a performance?"
A whisper from behind. It resembled a human voice, yet was entirely different, like a creature whose vocal cords weren't designed for human speech, desperately trying to imitate it. I couldn't move. Following the rule, I continued to stare at the screen. But the presence behind me was overwhelming. Its body odor wasn't human. A terrible stench, a mix of burning old film and rotten flesh. And its breathing was abnormal. A wet sound, as if its lungs had holes.
"Where do you think I got the costume?"
The monster seemed to revel in my fear. Hot breath touched the back of my neck. Abnormally high temperature, not human body heat. And something stroked my hair. Not fingers. Something longer, with more joints. On the screen, someone holding a camera approached the tied man. The man tried to recoil, but the ropes held him. And then I realized his uniform was from this cinema.
"You know, Sean, rules are meant to be broken. At least, that's what that man thought."
On the screen, a terrifying torture began, but it wasn't mere violence. It seemed to have some ritualistic meaning. The man's blood dripped onto the floor in a specific pattern, forming a complex magic circle.
"His name was Marcus Haynes, your predecessor from 3 years ago.
The monster's voice seemed to resonate directly in my ear.
He was curious. He questioned the rules. Why he had to obey, why they wouldn't tell him the reasons. Very much like you."
On the screen, Marcus was screaming something. I couldn't hear the audio, but from the movement of his lips, I could tell he was saying, "Help me."
He broke rule #4. He turned around during the movie. He saw my face.
Behind me, a giant shadow moved.
In that moment, he became the starring actor of this movie. Forever. Repeating this performance every night for new audiences.
I won't describe what happened during the 30-minute movie. I don't even want to think about it. I vomited midway through, but I never averted my eyes from the screen. I felt hot breath on my back the moment I considered looking away. At the end of the movie, when Marcus's torture ended, the camera showed the entire room. That's when I learned the terrifying truth. The room where the torture took place was room 1. The same seating arrangement, the same wallpaper, the same carpet. Marcus had been tortured in the very spot where I was now sitting. And finally, The face of the one holding the camera was revealed. It was not a human face. When the lights came back on, the monster uttered one last thing.
Remember, Sean, rules are meant to be broken. That man thought so too.
Covered in blood and cold sweat, I ran into the office.
Good job handling last night.
David said calmly. He was drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. You knew about that man. Why didn't you tell me? I screamed. David explained.
Listen, Sean. There are things that can be avoided and things that cannot. Like room 3. Some things can be dealt with if you have knowledge. But some things grow stronger the more you know. Rule #4 is one of them. If you know too much, the power to make you avert your gaze from the screen becomes stronger. The previous man knew too much. That was his downfall. There's a line, Sean. A line that shouldn't be crossed. If you know too much, no amount of willpower can keep you from looking away from the screen.
Deep regret was etched on David's face.
Marcus was an excellent employee, curious and brave, just like you. But that was his undoing.
David pulled out an old file. Marcus Haynes' personnel record. Looking at the photo, it was indeed the man I saw on the screen.
He began to investigate Rule #4 thoroughly. Past incidents, the history of this cinema, even the building's blueprints. The more knowledge he gained, the stronger that monster became. Fear comes from understanding.
He explained.
The unknown is scary, but known fear is even scarier. That monster feeds on our fear. The more you know about it, the deeper you will fear it. On his last night, Marcus told me, I've learned the truth of the rules. I understand why that monster exists, why it screens movies in room 1, everything. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. That night, he encountered Rule #4. But because he knew too much, he couldn't keep his eyes on the screen. The moment he looked away, he saw the monster's true form. That was the end of him. This cinema was cursed from the beginning.
David continued in a heavy tone.
From its construction in 1923, the architect deliberately designed the building to seal something away.
He spread out an old blueprint. The building structure was shaped like a giant magic circle.
The 11 rules are rituals to maintain the seal. Employees unknowingly participate in maintaining the seal every day. If too many people break the rules, the seal weakens. And eventually, it will break.
David was silent for a long time. Then, he finally spoke.
It's the lingering resentment of the people who died from the influenza in 1919. This place was a hospital back then. Hundreds of people died here. They died in despair, without proper treatment. The monster in room 1 is the embodiment of that resentment. The anger and sorrow of the dead merged to become a single entity. It was rebuilt as a cinema to neutralize the resentment with the bright energy of an entertainment facility. However, the plan wasn't perfect. The resentment didn't disappear. Instead, it lurked in the darkness of the cinema, gathering power. And now, it's barely sealed by the 11 rules.
When I learned this truth, I made a decision to continue working at this cinema. I could have run away. I could have looked for another job, but I had a responsibility to maintain this seal and prevent the monsters from getting out into the world. David was surprised.
Why continue? You're free. You can quit anytime.
Someone has to do it. Besides, this job has meaning. Meaning in protecting people, I replied. David smiled. It was the first true smile I'd seen from him in his 13 years as manager.
You'll be a good employee. But promise me one thing. Don't try to know too much, like Marcus. Knowledge is power, but sometimes it's also destruction.
I nodded. At that moment, I still didn't know how terrifying the remaining 7 rules were, and that the final, 11th rule was the most dangerous of all. This happened about a year and a half into my employment. As an usher at the cinema, part of my job involved regular patrols to check if the sound and subtitles in each auditorium were working correctly. It was a particularly quiet weekday afternoon. Light rain was falling outside, and there were few patrons inside. Normally, I would have found the silence pleasant, but for some reason, that day was different. The air felt heavy, carrying an unsettling atmosphere, like the calm before a storm. Something was off. I felt it intuitively, but I couldn't neglect my duties. I started checking from room 1 in order. That day, as I casually opened the door to room 5, my blood ran cold. Every single audience member was staring at me in unison. Time felt like it had stopped. My hand, still gripping the doorknob, froze. My heart pounded furiously, and my throat was so dry I couldn't even swallow. Unblinking eyes caught me in the darkness. An unnatural smile was plastered on their faces. A mechanical, perfect smile like puppets pulled by strings. Elderly men, young women, and children alike all stared at me with the exact same expression. Their smiles curved at an angle that human muscles couldn't achieve, as if their facial skin was being forcibly stretched. Among the audience were the elderly couple I had seen earlier in room 1, but they were definitely in room 1. There hadn't been time for them to move. Yet, there they were, in the front row of room 5, staring at me. The movie was playing on the screen, but no one was watching it. Only their heads slowly rotated, following my movements. I even imagined I heard a creaking sound. I took a step back. 40 or so heads followed my movement in perfect synchronicity, with mechanical precision. I actually heard the sound of bones grinding, a dry, unnatural sound. I cautiously moved a step to the left. All their faces turned left. Move right, and they turned right, like a giant collection of clockwork dolls. I retreated carefully, trying not to make a sound, holding my breath. But their gaze never left me for a second. They didn't even blink. As I backed away, I scrutinized the audience again, and I was horrified. There should have been only about 40 people in the seats, yet I felt more gazes than that. On closer inspection, eyes seemed to glow in the shadows of the aisles, between the seats, and at both ends of the screen. All of them were staring at me. The moment I closed the door and stepped into the hallway, I was running. The fluorescent lights in the corridor flickered repeatedly, as if matching my heartbeat. I rushed to David, who was talking to a customer at the counter, and reported, panting. As the female customer looked on in confusion, David's face instantly turned pale. David apologized to the customer and asked if she could return in 5 minutes. She looked displeased but left without a word, seeing the seriousness of David's expression. David grabbed my shoulder and quietly asked,
How many were there?
"About 40, but I felt more gazes. From places other than the seats too," I replied. David's face grew even paler. After apologizing to the customer, David walked with me to room 5. At the entrance, he signaled with his hand for me to wait at the bottom of the stairs. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs, I noticed my hands were trembling. Watching David's back, his shoulders were also trembling slightly. Even David, who had worked in this cinema for over 10 years, felt fear. That made me even more anxious. The room was filled with an eerie silence. As David stood in the center before the screen, the audience's heads slowly rotated toward him, perfectly synchronized, like a single organism. I peered into the room from the gap in the stairs. There was an unsettling beauty in the audience's movements. It was terrifying yet hypnotic, and as I watched, my consciousness grew hazy. David spread his arms and faced the audience. His voice was low and authoritative.
What do you want?
David's voice was calm, but I could see him clenching his fists. The audience opened their mouths in unison, like a perfectly synchronized choir.
Hello, manager. It's been a while.
Their voice, though composed of dozens of voices, sounded as if a single person was speaking. A neutral, eerie sound, neither male nor female, and it had a familiar intimacy, tinged with nostalgia, as if reuniting with an old friend. I felt the room temperature drop instantly. David's shoulders trembled slightly.
What happened to the previous manager?
David asked quietly. The audience laughed. A terrifying laugh. Dozens of voices in perfect harmony.
He chose to accept our demands. A very wise decision.
State your demands and release them.
David said. The audience laughed again.
Release? They are already liberated. Liberated from fear, from suffering, and above all, from ignorance. There is nothing more beautiful than knowing the truth. Still as direct as ever. I liked you more than your predecessor.
David's expression faltered for a moment, as if an old wound had been reopened.
We want you to open room 3. Now.
In that instant, I saw the strength drain from David's body. I held my breath at the bottom of the stairs. Room 3, the room I had never entered before, always locked, and only David had the key.
That's impossible. Demand something else.
David replied. The audience's laughter echoed again.
Explain why it's impossible, manager. We will try to understand.
You know what opening room 3 means.
We know. That's why we demand it.
There was a long silence. The audience continued to stare at David, maintaining their smiles. In that silence, I noticed something strange. The audio from the movie playing on the screen had completely disappeared. The video was still playing, but no sound whatsoever could be heard, as if the audience's presence was absorbing all sound.
You know that your precious rules can't stop anything. They only delay it.
David took a step back. I had never seen him so disturbed.
The price has been paid.
The audience suddenly declared.
What price?
David asked, his voice trembling.
The price of time. We waited 42 years. The time your predecessor promised.
David's face turned pale.
These people are safe. Room 3 was not our true desire. Your memories of anguish and the unanswered questions that arise in your subordinates, that was our true reward.
The audience rose in unison. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, like parts of a giant machine.
We are satisfied. For now.
David said nothing. Then, the audience all turned toward me, gave a slight nod, and returned to their normal movie-watching state, as if a spell had been broken. The change was instantaneous. Their rigid bodies returned to natural postures, the unnatural smiles vanished, and their eyes regained their vitality. They started watching the screen again, enjoying the movie as if nothing had happened. I slowly ascended the stairs and approached David. He stood motionless, staring at the screen. "David?" I called out, and he turned around. His face was etched with deep exhaustion and an unspeakable sadness. David didn't explain anything to me, as usual. But late that night, he told me,
If you continue this job, the day will come when you understand everything. But whether you survive until that day is up to you.
It was the night of the Rise of Skywalker premiere, and the cinema was packed. As I was cleaning up popcorn scattered in the lobby, an agitated young man approached me, looking angry. He was in his late 20s, wearing an expensive jacket. His face was red, and he had clearly been drinking.
Can you fix the air conditioning? There's a weird noise coming from the ducts in the auditorium. It's annoying, and I paid for this,
He said. What kind of noise? I asked for details.
a clattering sound, like something running around.
His friend pulled his arm, saying, "Come on, let's just watch the movie." But the man shook him off.
It's noisy. I can't concentrate.
His rude tone annoyed me, but I maintained a smile. David would never tolerate rudeness to customers. "I'll take care of it right away," I replied. The man nodded, satisfied, and left with his friend. As I watched them go, I noticed something strange. He had two shadows. One was normal, and the other moved slightly behind. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but they had already disappeared into the crowd. Once the man left, I retrieved a package labeled R6 from behind the counter. It was strangely heavy and felt damp. I carried it to the garbage disposal room. On the way to the disposal room, I noticed the package's unusual weight. It was significantly heavier than previous R6 packages I had carried, and it was warm, as if it were alive. Entering the disposal room, the temperature suddenly dropped. The exhaust fan was running, but the air felt stagnant. When I removed the air duct grill, I heard a sound from within, a continuous, light tapping, like fast tap dancing. It was the sound of long legs striking a metal surface. The sound had a steady rhythm, as if something was dancing to music, and occasionally, a faint whimpering sound mixed in. I took a deep breath and crawled into the duct. Peering into the duct from the entrance, the interior was completely dark. I regretted not bringing a flashlight, but I couldn't turn back. Inside, it was surprisingly cold and humid, making it hard to breathe. Pushing myself forward with my elbows and knees, I advanced about 10 meters. In the dimness, I saw a mound of something ahead. The mound was irregularly shaped. At first, I thought it was old machine parts, but as I got closer, I realized it was bones. Animal bones. From small to large, scattered across the duct floor. All were completely stripped of flesh and looked bleached white. Among the bones were some that were clearly not from birds, some from quadrupeds, and, horrifyingly, I saw what looked like human finger bones. I frantically pulled out my flashlight. When the light illuminated the pile of bones, I gasped at its sheer scale. Hundreds, no, thousands of bones piled up. With trembling hands, I opened the package, revealing a whole chicken. The moment I placed it on the pile of bones, the sound stopped. The silence was unnatural, as if the world had paused. Only the sound of my breathing echoed. The silence lasted for a few seconds, then it began. Clatter, 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 clatter. This time it was different. A hungry, frantic rhythm. The sound of something scuttling was mixed in. The heavy, sharp claws scraping metal, all of it heading in my direction. The moment the flashlight beam hit the darkness ahead, I almost screamed. Dozens of slender shadows crawled out from the pile of bones. They were insect-like in form, but much larger than ordinary insects. Long legs, sharp claws, and gleaming compound eyes. They swarmed the whole chicken, tearing at the flesh in an instant. I desperately backed away. There was supposed to be a 30-second time limit, but I didn't know how much time had passed. 20 seconds? 10 seconds? As I retreated, I realized something terrifying. Several of the creatures were coming toward me. Their movements were swift and persistent. My foot caught on something. I looked back and saw a human hand embedded in the duct wall. The hand was grasping my ankle.
Help me.
A faint voice whispered, and behind me, I felt the duct exit. I desperately pushed my body out and slammed the grill shut. The moment I closed the grill, something slammed into it. There was a sound of metal grinding, but it held. From inside, I heard the sound of flesh being torn, slowly, as if savoring it. I crouched there, trembling uncontrollably. The feeling of that hand, a human hand, still lingered on my palm. Warm, damp, desperately clinging to me. That night, I washed my hands repeatedly, but the sensation wouldn't go away. This happened 6 months ago. I had grown too accustomed to the job, and I let my guard down. That was my biggest mistake. It was a particularly busy day. A weekend afternoon, and the cinema was bustling with families and young couples. I was constantly dealing with incoming customers, lacking my usual caution. Liam was a new colleague who had joined 3 months prior. He was competent, good with customers, and quickly accepted by everyone. However, I had noticed something peculiar about him. He had an extreme aversion to looking in mirrors, and I had never once seen him eat. After walking from room 6 to the opposite side of the lobby, I realized I had no shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Perhaps my fatigue was making me hallucinate. But no matter where I looked, at my feet, at the wall, my shadow was nowhere to be seen. Everyone else's shadows appeared normal, but I alone seemed to have lost mine. Cold sweat ran down my back. I turned around and saw my shadow lying on the floor near the room 6 door, completely separated from me. The shadow moved independently of my actions. Even though I was standing, it lay on the floor, occasionally writhing, as if trying to escape from something. Standing between my shadow and me was my colleague, Liam. He stared at me, a faint smile on his lips. Liam's positioning was perfect. As I tried to approach my shadow, he would move too, as if his sole purpose was to block the path between us. I looked around, and that wasn't the only anomaly. All the shadows were pointing in different directions, as if each object was illuminated by a separate light source. The audience's shadows pointed towards the ceiling. The reception counter's shadow stretched towards the wall. The poster's shadow fell towards the floor. The laws of physics had completely broken down, and most horrifyingly, there were extra elements mixed into the shadows. Hands, feet, and faces that belonged to no one were incorporated into the shadows of others.
Sean, are you all right?
David's voice called from the office door, sounding concerned, but I couldn't answer. Something was wrong. Something was fundamentally twisted. David's voice was unmistakably his, but his shadow was facing me. David himself was facing the office, but only his shadow stared in my direction. I tried to go back to room 6. Liam stood in my way.
David is talking to you, Sean.
He said. Liam's smile was thin and cold. How do you know what I'm doing? I asked.
I'm just concerned for a colleague.
He replied, but Liam's eyes held no warmth. They had a cold, predatory gleam, like a hunter spotting its prey. I left something in room 6, I said.
What did you forget, Sean?
He knew. He knew this situation, my confusion, everything. It was a routine patrol, I replied.
Patrol? Today is Tuesday. Your patrol is supposed to be on Wednesday and Friday.
Liam continued. I was speechless. It was indeed Tuesday. Why was I on patrol? David's footsteps approached.
Sean, what did you forget?
This time, David stood next to Liam. Both were staring at me. I had no choice but to lie.
Sean, you look pale.
David said, sounding worried. I'm fine, just a little tired, I replied.
Have you been sleeping well lately?
Why was he asking that? I was confused. I forgot to wipe up a spilled drink. I'll get paper towels from the garbage room and clean it up, I explained.
Liam, help him out.
David said, returning to his office. Liam's smile widened. As David left, I carefully observed his retreating back. His shadow seemed normal, but something felt off. His gait was slightly unnatural, as if he didn't quite grasp his own center of gravity.
Shall we go then, Sean?
Liam said. On the way to the garbage room, Liam walked beside me, but I couldn't hear his footsteps. Only mine own echoed in the hallway. Liam, how long have you worked at this cinema again? I asked.
3 months. You gave me the orientation, remember?
He replied. I searched my memory. I did have a memory of giving Liam an orientation, but the memory was vague, hazy, like it was covered in fog. As we approached the garbage room, the air grew heavy. It felt like walking through water, and there was a strange smell, a sweet, putrid odor like rotting flowers.
Sean, have you been having nightmares lately?
Liam suddenly asked. I stopped. Why would you ask?
Oh, your complexion is just so poor. This job can be mentally taxing sometimes.
He replied. Liam's voice was gentle, but his eyes were cold. When we reached the garbage room, Liam dropped the act. He stared directly at me, wearing that eerie smile.
I'm tired of acting.
Liam said. His voice had changed. It was low and resonant. Who are you? I asked.
You don't need to know. I'm just here to take your shadow back.
The air around Liam began to distort. I took a desperate gamble. I punched Liam square in the face with all my might. The moment my fist connected with Liam's face, there was an unusual sensation. It felt like punching jelly, an unnatural elasticity, and Liam's face distorted for a moment. Literally, his facial features collapsed. Whatever was inhabiting his body staggered backward in surprise. I seized the opportunity and opened the air duct grill. As Liam's fingers grabbed my shoulder, his face was no longer human. His eyes were shadowy holes, and his mouth was unnaturally twisted.
You made a big mistake.
Liam's voice resonated with a discordant chorus of multiple voices.
Playtime is over. Time to meet your shadow.
I shook off Liam's hand and retreated further into the garbage room. He slowly pursued me. His movements were not human, as if his joints bent in unnatural directions.
You want to know room 6's secret? I'll tell you. That room is a gateway to the shadow world, and your shadow has already become an inhabitant of that world.
I kicked him and shoved him against the air duct entrance. At that moment, I heard a sound from within, the scuttling of numerous thin legs. From deep within the duct, the sounds of those hungry creatures echoed. Clatter, 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 clatter. But this time, another element was mixed into the sound. Human screams, cries of pain. The thing in Liam's form understood. Its eyes widened.
No,
It screamed.
we had a deal.
Liam shrieked. But the residents of the duct didn't care. And then it was dragged inside, with the sound of bones bending at unnatural angles, screaming into the dark depth. Liam's final screams gradually faded, eventually turning into chewing sounds. Wet, tearing flesh. That lasted for about 10 minutes, and then complete silence returned. When I returned to the lobby, something in David's form rushed out of the office, but I had already laid my hand on the room 6 door.
Sean,
His voice was mixed with despair and anger, but it was too late. I opened the door, leaped inside the room, and closed the door behind me. Inside room 6, it was completely dark, but I felt a warmth at my feet. I looked down and saw my shadow there. It clung to my feet, trying to return to its original place. Silence. I cautiously opened the door, and the lobby was empty. And at my feet, My shadow had returned to normal. After that, no one ever asked about Liam's whereabouts. It was as if he had never existed in the first place. His locker was empty, and his time card had vanished from the records. But I remember, and sometimes I feel as if I hear his voice from deep within the ducts. My shift that night was unusually long. A colleague suddenly fell ill, and I had to take over his night shift. It was past 2 a.m. The cinema was completely silent, and a strong wind was blowing outside. The rain drumming against the windows made an irregular rhythm. One day, about a year ago, I was about to finish cleaning the garbage disposal room. Just one more cart to haul, and I'd be done. I longed for my bed at home. When I tried to lift the last garbage bag, I realized it was far heavier than expected. Ordinary office trash should weigh no more than 5 kilograms, but this bag felt like over 20 kilograms. The bag's surface was damp and felt faintly warm to the touch. Then one of the garbage bags convulsed. At first, I thought it was an illusion. Perhaps I was seeing things due to fatigue, but the bag was definitely moving, as if something from inside was pushing upward. It fell to the floor with a wet, organic sound, and a scream erupted from inside.
Help me. Please, help me.
It was a woman's voice. The bag writhed on the floor, and whoever was inside struggled against the thick plastic. I recognized that voice. It was the young woman I had seen watching a movie in room 7 last week. She had come alone and happily watched a romantic comedy. After the screening, she had smiled and told me it was a wonderful movie.
Please let me out. I can't breathe.
The voice grew weaker. It sounded suffocated and desperate. I reached out to tear the bag, and then I froze.
Rule #8.
David's voice echoed in my head. Never open it. No matter what's inside, no matter whose voice you hear, never open it. But what if that woman was really inside? The voice inside the bag trembled with terror. Is anyone there?
Please help me.
A sobbing sound. The bag shrank and expanded, and then a hand shot out of the bag and grabbed my arm. The bag shrank and expanded, and then a hand shot out of the bag and grabbed my arm. The hand was cold and damp, but it was definitely a human hand. Slender fingers, manicured nails, a bracelet on the wrist. I remembered that bracelet. It was the same one the woman from last week had worn. I screamed and jumped back.
Help me. I can't move. I can't breathe.
The hand desperately reached out to grab me. Its fingers touched my uniform, clinging as if begging for help.
It's dark. So dark and cold.
The arm was indeed human, but it was physically impossible for a human to fit into that bag. I looked around the disposal room. I could see other garbage bags moving faintly. Not all of them, but faint sounds were coming from some of the bags. Groans, sobs, whispers begging for help. What was this disposal room? How many people were trapped in here? I lifted the bag. The hand inside tried to grab me. The screaming continued. It felt heavy, a real weight. Who would do this? I asked myself. Another voice came from inside the bag. Man's voice.
You'll meet the same fate.
It was an authoritative, elderly male voice, as if warning me. As I carried it to the disposal chute, the hand from the bag kept desperately trying to grab me.
Please, please.
As I approached the chute, the hand's movements became more frantic, clinging to me with desperate strength.
I want to go home.
The woman's voice cried.
I want to see my family.
When I placed the bag on the edge of the chute, it clung to the edge with its hand.
Please, I don't want to go back, please.
Where don't you want to go back to? I asked without thinking.
The dark place. The cold place. The painful place.
The voice was barely audible.
There are many other people there too. Everyone is crying.
I hesitated to dispose of it, but Rule #8 was absolute. I slammed the chute lid down onto the hand. With a scream, it slid into the darkness, scraping against the walls as it fell. As the bag fell, the last voice I heard was a chorus of multiple people. "We'll meet again." And then, silence. I crouched there, vomiting. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The feel of that hand, its desperate grip, its final words. It was all real. But even if it was real, I couldn't break the rule. I had learned that. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. What if those voices were real humans? But at the same time, I had also learned that nothing I saw or heard in this place was ever as it seemed on the surface. The next morning, David called me.
Good job handling the disposal last night.
He said, "David, what was inside that bag?"
It's better not to know.
He interrupted me.
The more you know, the harder this job becomes.
"But what if it was really a person?"
Sean,
David's voice was firm.
the rules are here to protect us. The moment you start doubting them, you become prey to this cinema.
I couldn't say anything.
Just remember one thing. Everything that happens in this cinema has a reason, and all we can do is follow the rules.
Since that day, every time I enter the garbage disposal room, I feel as if I hear faint sounds from the bags, but I never listen to ensure I don't forget Rule #8. It happened yesterday. In my 3 years of working at this cinema, I had never encountered Rule #9. No other employee I asked could recall it either. David himself had never even explained it to me. It was as if this rule alone was a contingency clause that would never actually be activated. That's why, when the door to room 3 opened yesterday, my brain completely froze. The man walked out as if nothing had happened. He was dressed in a suit, with neatly combed hair, and utterly normal, gentlemanly appearance. But his eyes, the moment I saw those vacant eyes, an icicle pierced my spine. Something that should reside in human eyes was completely absent.
Good evening.
The man's voice was flat, as if playing a recording. It was unnerving, like a machine that knew nothing of emotion attempting to imitate human speech. I stood frozen. 3 years of experience served no purpose in that moment. The words of Rule #9 echoed in my head. If someone emerges from room 3, comply with their request and report to the manager immediately.
I would like to speak with the manager.
The man's lips curved subtly. It took the shape of a smile, but something about it twisted my stomach. "This way." My voice trembled, as if my ice-bound brain had finally issued a command. My feet began to move. The man followed me silently. His footsteps were strangely light, as if a shadow without substance was walking. When we reached the office, David's face turned ashen the moment he saw the man. His hand, holding a coffee cup, trembled, and the faint clinking of ceramic echoed. "Rule #9. I whispered.
Understood. Wait outside.
David's voice had lost its usual authority, squeezed out like that of a condemned prisoner. I stepped outside the office, but through the thin wall, I could hear the conversation inside. It started as low whispers, but gradually David's voice grew louder. I distinctly heard him let out a sob at one point. About 30 minutes later, the office door opened. When David emerged, he looked as if he had aged 10 years. His face was devoid of color, and his hands trembled slightly. Just before the door closed, I peered into the office. The man was nowhere to be seen. "David, what in the—"
Go home, Sean.
David's voice was hollow.
Rest, sleep, and prepare yourself.
Prepare for what? David stared at me. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he had been crying for a long time.
Tomorrow, we're breaking rules and hash 11.
The next day, the cinema displayed a temporarily closed sign. It cited equipment malfunction as the reason, but I knew the truth. David was already in his office. He sat in his chair, staring at the wall, lost in thought. When I entered, he slowly raised his head.
Do you remember rule hash 10?
Of course, I remembered. If you find the book bound in black leather, never open it. That book appeared all over the cinema, in the corner of the garbage room, on the lobby floor, sometimes even on David's desk. Its worn leather cover, its time yellowed pages. We all knew of its existence, yet we never touched it.
Today, we open it.
David said, standing up.
Let's find out where it is.
It took a while to find the book. As if sensing our intention, it wasn't in its usual spots. When we finally discovered it on top of a filing cabinet in the office, David gave a bitter smile.
As expected.
He picked up the book and carefully opened its cover. I tried to peek over his shoulder, but David immediately closed the book.
Not yet, Sean. Wait a little longer.
David, please explain what's happening. Since yesterday, I've been completely in the dark.
You're right.
David smiled, but his smile was etched with deep fatigue.
When you've done this job for 15 years, you get into the habit of not telling anyone more than necessary.
David opened the book again and began to turn the pages.
13 years ago, I made a mistake. I was deceived by Room 3 and opened the door. Room 3 used someone I loved to trick me, and it tried to bring about disaster.
Someone you loved.
Through that person's sacrifice, the disaster was temporarily sealed. But yesterday, that time ran out. If we don't act, Room 3 won't even need anyone to open its door anymore. It will escape on its own.
David pointed to a specific page in the book.
This is a kind of manual. All the cinema's rules are written here. Please leave the room for a moment. It won't take long.
I left the office as instructed. As I stared at David's shadow reflected on the blinds, another shadow suddenly appeared. Then another. Soon, multiple shadows surrounded David. Voices could be heard from inside. David's voice was firm, but the answering voices were multiple, sharp whispers, like knives scraping against skin. The shadows overlapped David, and his figure disappeared from view. I rushed into the office. David stood leaning on his desk, breathing heavily. But he was safe. What was that? What just happened?
Messengers, or perhaps watchers.
David smiled, but it was a smile filled with resignation.
I called forth beings that should not be summoned, but this is an emergency.
David exited the office, clutching the black leather book. I followed him. When we reached the lobby, a woman was standing there. She was much taller than us, with deep black hair and pale skin. Her black dress reached the floor, as if shadow itself had taken human form. In her hand, she held a wooden goblet. The liquid inside was clear, appearing like water at first glance, but I knew instinctively that it was anything but harmless. The woman in black. She was a frequent presence in the cinema. She would wander around, offering drinks to staff, but she never forced anyone if they refused. Rule #11. If the woman in the black dress offers you a drink, never accept it, was one of the easier rules for us to follow.
Will you accept my cup?
Her voice was faint, carrying an immeasurable sadness. I instinctively tried to refuse, but the words caught in my throat. She wasn't looking at me. She was speaking to David. David remained silent for a while.
I will accept.
David, what are you? I started to protest, confused and terrified, but he cut me off.
I have to do this, Sean. There's no other way to stop what's coming.
He turned back to the woman.
It has been a long time.
The woman smiled faintly. David took the goblet. He hesitated for a moment, then, as if resolute, he quickly drank its contents in one gulp. The sound of the goblet hitting the floor echoed unnaturally in the silence. David groaned, stumbled, and leaned on me. His weight almost made me fall. David's face turned ashen, and blood splattered on the floor with a cough.
The price has been paid.
The woman whispered.
Paid.
David replied in a trembling voice, spitting more blood.
Now it's your turn.
Indeed. What do you seek?
The woman smiled sadly.
I want to know how to stop Room 3 from escaping.
David chose his words carefully. He probably understood that this was his one chance. The woman frowned.
I don't think you will like the answer, but do you truly wish to know?
I must know.
David replied, gritting his teeth. Blood was now dripping from the corners of his eyes.
Tell me.
The woman bent down to his ear and whispered words I couldn't hear. In that instant, I instinctively understood that I must never hear those words.
The transaction is complete. Goodbye, David.
The woman walked away as if nothing had happened. She turned the corner, and I was sure that even if I followed her, she would no longer be there. David turned to me. Blood streamed from the corners of his mouth and from his eyes. The black leather book slipped from his fingers. What did you do? What's happening? What did she say? David's reply was too faint to hear.
Go to the projection room, Sean. Start all the projectors. Hurry.
I rushed up to the projection room. Mechanically, I flipped the switches, starting all the projectors. The whirring of machines filled the cinema, and screenings began in every empty room. I understood what David was trying to do, but I understood too late. When I ran down the stairs and returned to the lobby, David was no longer in front of the office. Only the black leather book lay open on the floor. Its presence was the only evidence that he had stood there. I looked around. David was standing in front of room 3. His hand was on the door handle. David, stop! I yelled. He turned around. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes and smiled.
13 years, Sean. Use them well.
And then he opened the door. Beyond the door was complete darkness. Light was completely cut off at the threshold, making it impossible to see what lay beyond. David stepped forward without hesitation, and the door closed behind him. I stood frozen. A tremor ran through the air. The door to room 3 shook violently, frame and all. The sound of something inside banging against the walls, trying to escape, echoed, but it was a futile struggle. David's sacrifice, in whatever way, had bound room 3 once again. The vibrations gradually subsided, and the door stopped shaking. Silence returned. A page turned at my feet. I looked down at the black leather book, and the last page was open. On it, a single line was written in black ink. Rule #12. There must always be a manager. A week has passed since then. I am now sitting in David's office, in his chair, at his desk, having taken over the responsibilities he bore. New employees have come in. Like I once was, they all find the cinema's rules strange and unreasonable, but they obey. For the pay, and because I command it. Yesterday, one of the new hires stopped in front of room 3 and asked about the sounds coming from inside. His face showed the same confusion and curiosity that mine had 3 years ago. I explained Rule #1. Never open the door to room 3 during a screening.
but I hear voices asking for help inside.
He said, "What you hear is what you wish to hear." I replied, "Room 3 is clever. It will try to deceive you by any means. But for 13 years, no one has opened that door. And under my management, I will never let it be opened." He was confused, but ultimately nodded. Tonight, I am rereading the black leather book, David's handwritten annotations, warnings, and records, and Rule #12, written on the final page. There must always be a manager. I now fully understand the meaning of this rule. Someone must continue to watch over this cinema. Someone willing to maintain the rules, guide the staff, and make the ultimate sacrifice when necessary. David made a mistake 13 years ago, and for 13 years, he lived to atone for it. Now, it's my turn. Someday, I too will be faced with a choice. I will have to choose someone from the new staff, teach them the rules, and prepare them. And someday, that person will sit in my chair. This is our destiny, an inescapable fate of everyone involved with this cinema. Outside, ordinary people live ordinary lives. They don't know about Room 3, or the woman in black, or the creatures lurking in the air ducts, nor do they need to know. As long as we are here, they are protected. The rules are absolute, and there must always be a manager. My name is Sean McBride. I am 21 years old, and I am now the manager of this cursed cinema. I record this story as a warning and a guide for whoever my successor may be. If you are reading this, it means you too have been drawn into the wheel of fate. Learn the rules, obey the rules, and be prepared. Someday, your turn will come.